Hello, RotoBallers, and before I get started on this week's show, how about a shout out to the Saskatchewan Roughriders of the Canadian Football League? Yes, that's right, they are the Grey Cup champions of the 112th Grey Cup. But hey, we're talking NFL, we're talking DSTs, and it is that time of the week again, and with the Chargers, the Broncos, the Dolphins, and the Commanders all on bye this week, fantasy managers may need to get creative in their pursuit of fantasy glory. For the record, Miami's defense, it's going to be missed this week. It has been a top 12 defensive unit since week number 8. Without further ado, here are 5 defenses fantasy managers can trust and start with confidence here in week number 12. Starting with the Cleveland Browns as they take on the Las Vegas Raiders. Yeah, despite all the struggles on the offensive side of the ball, we're not here to talk offense, we're here to talk defense, and this is where the Cleveland Browns are one of the most complete defenses in the National Football League. Cleveland, they sit tied for 4th in sacks with 32, 3rd in interceptions with 10, 7th in turnovers forced to 14, and 1st in passing yards allowed per game, and 2nd in total yards allowed per game. As for the Raiders, they're basically on the opposite end of that spectrum as they entered last week's contest against the Dallas Cowboys, averaging 272.7 total yards of offense per game, which happens to be the 3rd fewest, averaging just 185.2 passing yards per game. That's the 5th fewest, and 87.4 rushing yards per game. Again, the 3rd fewest. And since week number 7, the 14 fantasy points per game the Browns are averaging on defense, that is the most in fantasy. Geno Smith has been a defense's dream come true as he has been one of the most turnover-prone quarterbacks this season, having already thrown 12 interceptions before even taking to the field on Monday Night Football. Smith, he's also been sacked 27 times in the 9 games prior to the Week 11 primetime showdown. Another defense you're starting this week is the Seattle Seahawks as they take on the Tennessee Titans. Oh, how I have missed not having the Titans at my DST fingertips there the last couple of weeks. I mean, they've been a staple of this video series. It doesn't matter who's playing them, you're going to start that defense without a question. And you know what? It turns out that the best defense in all of fantasy, they are taking on Cam Ward this week. Seattle, they enter this week's contest averaging 9.8 fantasy points per game and will be looking to reestablish themselves as an elite option in fantasy after posting a mere 2 points last week against MVP hopeful Matthew Stafford and the Los Angeles Rams. Seattle's front end and back end have been one of the most cohesive units in all of football, ranking 8th in interceptions with 9 and 4th in the NFL in sacks with 32. After being sacked 3 times last week against the Texans, Ward has now been sacked a league-high 41 times this season. That's like the David Carr treatment going on right there. You don't have to be a scholar to figure out that 4.1 sacks per game is going to add up quickly for fantasy managers, and it also doesn't help that Ward is going to be without the services of Calvin Ridley, who was lost for the season after fracturing his fibula. Another defense I am trusting this week is the Jacksonville Jaguars as they head to the desert to take on a horse with one name, and that name is Brissett. Now, don't sleep on the Jaguars. They've posted 23 fantasy points combined over the last 2 weeks, and they have 5 double-digit fantasy performances this season, pushing their weekly total to 7.7 fantasy points per game, which is the 8th most. Now, last week, Jacoby Brissett, he completed an NFL record 47 passes, threw for 452 passing yards, a pair of touchdowns, and it seems like it'd be pretty much an unwise decision to bet against Brissett, who has been a top 12 fantasy quarterback in each of his starts this season. But he also threw a couple interceptions, and in all likelihood, he's going to be without Dermocado, which means we're looking at Michael Carter and Bam Knight once again. If you're going to throw 40 plus times, the Jaguars may not be the team that you want to do that against. While teams have been able to move the ball in the air against this Jaguars team, the boys from Duval County have 13 interceptions in 10 games, which happens to be the second most this season. Another defense you should fire up with confidence. How about the Ravens as they take on the New York Jets? New York has allowed 36 sacks this season. Only Cam Ward and Justin Herbert have been sacked more often than Jets quarterbacks this season. And while the Ravens, they are near the bottom of the league when it comes to sacks, they seem to be rounding out into shape here in recent weeks, and they registered 3 sacks against the Browns last week. Further to the Ravens' defensive turnaround. On the season, the Ravens have allowed the 7th most total yards per game, 354.1. However, over the last 3 weeks, the Ravens are allowing just 294.7 yards per game. That is the 10th fewest. In fact, fantasy managers should take notice that 10.7 fantasy points per game over their 3 previous contests are second only to the Pittsburgh Steelers over that period. Now, the duo of Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, they only completed 11 of 26 passes for 115 yards. And I know what you're thinking. It's Gabriel and it's Sanders. Who cares? Well, that's pretty much the equivalent of Justin Fields' passing production against the Patriots on Thursday Night Football, where the Jets signal caller threw for 116 yards on 15 of 26 passing. And the final start of the week, it is the Los Angeles Rams as they take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, despite scoring 32 points last week, I'm sure some people may be afraid to start the Rams against the Buccaneers, and we have seen the Rams kind of bite us in the backside a couple times this season. But Baker Mayfield, he was held in check, completing just 16 of 28 passes for 172 yards, throwing 1 touchdown and 1 interception. It was actually Sean Tucker who had himself a legacy outing. They're averaging 5.6 yards per carry on 19 attempts, finding the end zone on a pair of occasions. As a team, the Rams have been limiting opposing rushing attacks to 103.8 yards per game this season. For Tampa Bay, they're going to need to find a way to protect Baker Mayfield and to establish a run in order to cap the Rams' DST potential. Los Angeles is arguably the most opportunistic defense in the NFL, tied for third with 10 interceptions, third in fumbles recovered with 8, and ninth in the NFL in sacks with 27. Since week number 6, the Rams are averaging 10.4 fantasy points per game. That is the third most in that category as well. They have produced 9 or more fantasy points in 4 of their last 5 contests. And if you haven't already done so, hit that like button, hit that follow button, and make sure you head over to RotoBaller.com for all the latest fantasy news and analysis. We'll see you next time.